Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name's Jeff Thomas, and we've got a very special guest with us this week, a great old friend of mine, Todd Stewart. Todd is the former CEO and owner of a logistics company called GulfWinds, and is the recent author of a new book called Delivering Hope, Leading a Business That Builds the Kingdom of God. Welcome to the program, Todd Stewart.
Glad to be here, brother.
This is going to be fun. Todd, we always try to start with just a little bit of context on where did you grow up? What was your family like? Were you a believer early? You know, what was the situation in the Stewart household growing up?
Yeah, so grew up in Northeast Houston, a little town called Humble, Texas, kind of famous for where Exxon Oil started, Humble Oil. But just middle-class family. Grew up with a dad that did not know the Lord. I did have a grandfather who was very sold out. He was a deacon in the Baptist church. They lived a good distance from us up in East Texas. So I didn't grow up going to church other than what I would call a creaster on Christmas and Easter. And that was really the extent of my kind of Christian upbringing. I just kind of grew up doing sports and I had good childhood memories. Had good parents, if you will. I knew they loved me, cared for me, but from a spiritual perspective, there wasn't a lot of like leadership or how to as it related to the things of God.
Now, I know you're an only child and you grew up also in a family business. Can you talk a little about how your dad started the family business?
Yeah, crazy story. I mean, this is really the miracle story of our life and family. And 51 years old, my dad had been in the shipping business his whole life, never lost his job. He had had positions all the way up to managing director in the UK for a large shipping company, got transferred back to Atlanta. And then there was a big merger between two companies, and he found himself laid off in his early 50s. And so literally trying to figure out, what do I do next? Took his 401k money and decided to start GulfWinds International, which to me right now is crazy to think about.
Right. Most people wouldn't do that when they're 30, let alone their early 50s. So
yeah.
Did you ever talk to him about that? Like, Dad, what were you thinking? Like, of course he could have gotten another job somewhere, but did he have an idea that was, what do you think it was that gave him the strength to do that?
I just think my dad he'd made a lot of money for a lot of people. My dad was he was a salesman, he was a statesman. And I think he just thought, I'm gonna step out. Ironically, he wasn't a man of faith, but in this instance, God had a bigger purpose. And so he took that leap at an age where most are trying to figure out where they need to move their money and do we have enough for when we retire.
Yeah. Well, I think he had the confidence, to your point. He'd done a lot of business development. He had the confidence to pull it off. And of course, so how old are you when this starts? Because I know you were spent some time in your teens in a warehouse. So when did you get put to work?
Yeah, so I mean, growing up, I had odd jobs. I worked at a paint and body shop. That was kind of my first working experience. And I busted tables at an Italian restaurant here in Houston. But later, I actually worked at a warehouse for a friend of my dad's, who later actually became his partner early in the business. And just doing manual labor. And so that was kind of my experience on the labor side. I was actually baling cotton or pulp that came out of rail cars. And we had 2x4s lined up, and we had banding equipment, and it's really good for developing your shoulders.
Yeah, your football coach was happy that you were throwing around bags of, wasn't there also some coffee beans rolling around there somewhere, maybe?
There was, yeah. When we started the company, that was started with coffee beans, and we handled imported green coffee which, as we've joked about, does not smell like roasted coffee. So I would come home and literally my wife,
Smell.
Nikki, would just be like, "What is that?" And so my whole truck, everything would smell like green coffee. But yeah, our first customer, it was great. It was really no one didn't know this at the time, but it was my mother's first cousin that gave us the opportunity.
Oh
She
my
was
God.
actually managing a roasting facility for a company called Continental Coffee here in Houston.
Amazing. All right, so you go off to college, and now summers, are you still working in the warehouse, in the office? Like, what were the summer jobs while you were in college?
Yeah, so Gulf Winds wasn't started at that time.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, so it didn't start until really right when I graduated from
okay.
school. Yeah, they opened in April and I went to work that September.
And so, okay, so, but you did, so it's not like we often hear these stories of family businesses, and I like to
Mhm.
point out, a lot of them they're wonderful blessings and wonderful challenges,
Sure.
frankly. And I think there a lot of them that have been going for a long time. They're like, okay,
Mhm.
go get another job somewhere. I have a feeling your
Mhm.
dad's like, come help me as
Yeah.
fast as possible. What was that discussion like?
I'm so thankful in hindsight
Yeah,
that he invited me in.
right.
At the time, I had a buddy that had a dad who was way up with GM, and he was trying to get me into their management training program. And actually, I'd even talked to Nikki about moving to Michigan to do that. And thank goodness, my whole life would have been different. But I stayed
Yeah,
here and literally went to work in the warehouse, driving a forklift and throwing coffee bags. Because we really had one customer, one location. We had just opened. We didn't have resources. So we were trying to save a buck every time we could. And so they paid me $250 a week. And my dad wasn't taking a paycheck at all at the time.
wow. Well, so it really had just started, and
It had
so you
just
did every
birthed.
job there could be, right? I mean, this was 25 years of doing this. So maybe take and tell me when is the appropriate, when did this conversation happen about faith with your grandfather? Will you tell that story?
Sure. Yeah. So about 2 years into the business, my grandfather had been diagnosed with lung cancer, and this is my mother's father, and
Okay.
he was really the rock or the faith bed of the family. Despite the fact that I wasn't around him much, I just knew by the way he lived, by the way he talked, by the way he carried himself that he loved the Lord, and so he was a man of character, and I knew that. And he called me in because I was the oldest grandchild, Jeff, by 8 years. And I'm
Okay.
17 at the time. I'm a senior in high school, um, really just focused on sports and my girlfriend and that kind of stuff. But I knew this was serious. He called me over to Beaumont, Texas, which is just east of Houston. And, uh, and he wanted to talk to me specifically. And so I walked in there as a 17-year-old, and you've probably been in a hospital room with somebody dying of cancer, and it's not a fun place to be.
No.
You're a little nervous. You're 17. I'm trying to figure out what this is all about. I
Right.
knew my
Summoned.
grandfather.
You've been
Yeah,
summoned.
I
Yeah.
was summoned, and
Yeah.
I knew he loved me deeply. Obviously, had a great relationship. I was the first grandchild, and again, 8 years older than the others. So I walk in there, and he basically says, "Todd, you need Jesus in your life."
Wow.
And in essence, I've seen him. And I later found out that he had not spoken in a couple of weeks. And my mother was a nurse, so she had been literally nursing him all the way home. And I didn't realize, crazy enough, Jeff, at the time, because I was just doing life and doing high school and all the things that kids do. I didn't realize the treasure that he laid at my
Yeah.
feet that day, is
Yeah.
how I describe it.
But it actually, for the first time, but of course we're friends. I've heard that story, but it just hit me as you were telling that story this time that that's something you would do now. So maybe catch us up to your grandfather. Okay, you know what was that was so important to him,
Hmm.
right? For him to call you, like he was thinking about that for a long time, and God must have told him, "Hey, get Todd in here, share this with him. I know you're weak, but like you got to get the
Yeah.
words out." And he may have even been a little disappointed in the reaction. Is that fair? Like at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that God ordained that conversation. I mean, those that know me now, they would never believe that that was even the case. And of course, back to your first question, I mean, 2 years into the business, of course, is when I actually surrendered my
Yeah,
life to
tell that
Christ.
story.
Yeah. And so I had a buddy that I played high school football with who had invited me to church and different things. And it was just one of those things I did just to go. But
Right.
I even remember looking at him and going, "Hey, you're not still doing that Jesus thing, are you?" And and it was just, the peer pressure that's
Right. Yeah, of
found
course.
in
No, of
those years.
course.
It's so heavy.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just it was amazing. But they pursued me. I had several different people. I even worked out with a guy in college who had been in a car wreck who prayed before we would work out. And
Wow.
so I look back and I think about these little markers, these
Mm.
little people that just put a little uh, seed into my heart that kind of hearkened me back some to that seed that my grandfather had put there.
Yeah.
And so I got invited to a men's Bible study at Humble First Baptist Church in Humble, and literally stroll in there just thinking I'm 2 years married. Maybe I can learn a little something about marriage and play basketball afterwards. And had no idea that God was just about to totally rearrange my entire life in a great way. Um, that's exactly what he did. A couple of weeks later, I'd been in a life group or Sunday school, we called it. And I remember the associate pastor preaching a message, Jeff, that said, God's going to give you opportunities in your life, and you have to seize the moment. And
Mm.
I just remember the Holy Spirit convicting me deeply in that moment. And I remember some tears. I looked at Nikki, and she was sitting next to me, and she knew what was happening. I was pretty new to this, but I just knew in that moment, we used to do altar calls. I was
Yeah.
getting up and I was about to walk down that carpet and say, I need to confirm this Jesus calling on my life. And that's exactly what I did. And later got baptized and stood before the church and shared my testimony. And just, it's never gotten old. It's been the greatest joy of my life.
I mean, I can testify. The fire is still burning all these years ago, and from all those years ago, and it's just a joy to see how that flame just gets hotter, frankly, with time. Okay, so now I'm picturing you showing up to work. Now, how old are you?
At that point, I'm probably 25 years old.
Yeah, 25 years old. You've been working for a couple of years out of college. Dad's not really a believer. The business is still pretty new. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And you are on fire for the
Yeah.
Lord, and you show work. So talk about these next few years where you're just, it's coming out of every pore you have, and how does it manifest itself at work?
Well, it was crazy because I knew that I really believed that Gulf Winds had a great opportunity. I really
Yeah.
believed that we could do some special things. And I believed that there was something behind that. I didn't know what that was, but I just remember I was so blessed. I've shared this with you, Jeff. Early on in my walk with God, our pastor took our entire church through evangelism training. It was called
Oh,
Faith Evangelism Training.
okay.
And so I knew nothing of the scriptures. I didn't grow up learning the Bible, but I knew enough. I memorized a few verses, John 3:16 and some others. And I literally went door to door in Humble, Kingwood, Atascocita, Northeast Houston. And my pastor, I was on his team. You can imagine that's intimidating as a
Right,
new
right,
believer. But it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me because what I realized was God was enough. Like all I needed was my story, that He changed my heart, that I trusted in
right.
Jesus. I didn't have to be this theologian that had it all down and knew all the answers. Literally, people they're hurting, they need hope. And I was able to share, hey, this is what God did. It took a huge weight off of me. And to be forgiven, what does that look like? And so that spilled over into the office as well. Literally, I'd be interviewing people and I would ask them, hey, what do you understand it takes for a person to go to heaven? Do you have a church home? And those conversations, like people were just very open. And
Yeah.
over the next several years, just the greatest joy of my life throughout my career has been sharing my faith when I've had those opportunities and watching how God has worked, sometimes right on the spot, sometimes over a period of years to literally bring transformation to many. And so that became my heartbeat, my joy. And Yeah, but dad at the time, as you said, was not a believer. But here I am going over to his house on Sunday evenings, like telling him all these crazy
Yeah.
stories that God was doing.
He didn't have a chance, that poor guy.
And really, my mom for years had wanted my dad to go to church.
Okay. Okay.
And out of the blue, he saw the change in me and
Yeah.
said, "Hey, why don't we go down the street to this little church?" And they did. And a few years later, of course, my dad gave his life to the Lord,
Love it.
surrendered to Him, and
Love
later
it.
was baptized at our church. And so to do that together,
Oh,
that was like it was crazy because in a million years, my dad would tell you. My dad did a lot of things that were. He was a normal. He was lost as a believer. He traveled all the time, did a lot of sales. Entertainment was part of the job back in the '80s.
right.
You probably remember that, and it wasn't healthy for their marriage.
Right.
Had some infidelities and things that my mother forgave my father of. I
Wow.
admire my mother for many reasons, but
Mm.
even before my dad was saved, my mom was able to offer forgiveness, and in a way that honestly later led to them when my dad came to faith, they would say we have the best marriage we've ever had in our 60s and our 70s. And so that testimony carried
Yeah.
forward later in life. And I literally remember driving in the car, Jeff, with my dad, and him saying to me, "Todd, I wasn't always the best father." And he apologized to me after he
Yeah.
came to faith. I had long since forgiven him,
Right.
but something in his heart said, I need to make this right. And I feel like that's the sign of someone who's converted, who has trusted Christ, is they no longer fight. It's a release to be able to say, will you forgive me? And so I encourage those that know, have that conversation, release that burden, because God is able to bring in refreshment into your relationships.
Listen, man, God's calling on your life is for anyone who's met you, and I'm sure people listening to this for the first time can already figure this out. Your gift is evangelism, and it's really hitting me, even though I've heard this story before. For some reason, as we were preparing for this, and as I'm hearing you tell the story of your father, I think it's one of the most important parts of your story overall and your family story overall, because we're going to get into the things as you start taking over leadership at Golf Wins. If your dad's not on board
Hmm.
with this Jesus thing,
Yeah.
the story would be very different. So, and then we were talking before we started recording about how hard it can be in family businesses for communication to happen well,
Yeah.
for leadership to be passed, even. And so, you know, and the only things I've ever heard you talk about with your father are things of respect,
Hmm.
frankly, and honor. And I just think, man, what a gift God gave you to have him come to Christ. That you would be able to do that. That he would come, and then you would be able to communicate in this way. You talked about later. I know in the book you talk about the time that when you sort of took over leadership, and we don't have to jump ahead that far, but maybe just as well, when I'm on this train of thought, how your dad empowered you over time. Could you
Yeah.
just share a little about how he did that?
Yeah, I mean, he really modeled for me humility, because as I said earlier, my dad was a statesman. He had positions of authority within even the industry,
Yeah,
things like the security district here in Houston. Um, he was up for some pretty big roles here within the city, and so I always had that. I wouldn't call it pressure. I call it a blessing because
yeah,
again, when your father has a good name overall, it's a blessing to you as a child
it's
and a,
true.
and a son. Um, but yeah, I think ultimately his humility, especially when we transitioned to me from vice president to taking over in that season, the story that I tell that you've said you really love is the one that's he gave me the corner office
Right,
when he took my smaller office that was
right,
around the corner, in essence saying, I not only endorse this with a note to the company, but even as chairman now, I'm saying I'm empowering my son.
right.
And he purposefully stayed away, he was there if I needed anything. And probably, if anything, in hindsight, I think all young people want to do everything themselves. And it's
Exactly.
not wise. Like, we need
Right.
to know when to ask for help. But especially when you're in your 30s, you think you've got it all down and man, you're rocking. And I remember now looking back, there's probably a few things I would have probably went to him on that maybe I didn't. But by and large, I always knew he was there if I needed anything. But he was great at releasing and empowering others. And I
Yes.
think I got that same gift. It was
Yes.
always easy for me to, when I knew it was the right people, I was able to release control and empower others. And I think his modeling that for me was a big part of that.
I
It was a
do.
blessing to the company.
Yeah, no, I think it was a huge gift to everyone, and you're at the front of that line because I've watched you do that as well. But I know that was a big blessing. And but now when you take over, there's still plenty of challenges. Do you mind sharing one or two of the challenges you had? I know that was an old
Yeah.
business partner and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I think the real crucible moment, right, was, so we're leading this business, we're walking by faith. Most people don't know that my dad had gifted this partner 50% ownership with no financial investment. And again, I never want to downplay anybody's contribution because he was very smart and good at what he was
Sure.
in the business to do. I learned a lot from him. I served him for probably 15 years. He taught me a lot. We weren't always aligned, but again, God doesn't waste anything. But when we got to that moment where we were at an impasse, and through life circumstances, he decided that he was wanting to sell the business. And so you can imagine, I'm running this company now for a greater purpose. My dad and I are aligned, but we have a partner that's now 50% ownership.
Yeah.
And of course, the challenges with that in Texas, it's massive.
Yeah.
And so we're at an impasse. And this is the same time that we're trying to figure out how to transition to my leadership as well. And so it's really tough because you got these two guys that have been leading for 15 years, but behind the scenes we have a whole team that's operating and doing things well. And it was a lot of pressure during that moment. My dad also during that time was diagnosed with cancer.
Hmm.
So that made it really tough. The partner didn't even know that he had been diagnosed with cancer. So I'm carrying the weight of knowing,
Hmm.
and it's not a good cancer. It's a blood cancer that I know. They literally laid a paper on the table and said, "This is how long you live with this." And so we knew there was just a lot of pressure, not only internally but externally. But short version is God saw us through that, and yeah, by prayer and just did a miracle, got us through that, and we did an extended buyout with that partner. But it really stretched the business, Jeff.
Yeah.
When I say even our CPA, even our all the advisors, they said, "Don't do it, don't do it." They were advising us against it, but everything in me said, we're completely aligned. We're going in this direction. We have a greater purpose. God's in this. And I just felt at peace about it, as my dad did. And so we took out a loan, and we paid this guy, and then we took out an extended payout in addition to the loan. And so we were on the hook for the next several years and basically had to trust the Lord in that process. But as you said, it didn't necessarily get easier for me. It actually got harder, which is really hard to say because this is a God story. But anybody that's walked with the Lord for any length of time knows that you're kind of molded in the difficulties. And you remember back in 2014, well, we had probably 750,000 square feet of warehouse space for oil field dedicated to Halliburton at the time. And then the oil field died. Now, this is right after we had completed the buyout, right after I took
Right.
over as president. And so it was like, oh my goodness, we're going the opposite direction, yet we have all this spiritual momentum. And so it's crazy how God works sometimes. He just builds you in that moment, and he forces you to trust in him and not the resources of the world. And he definitely did that for me and also our team. As I look back on that season, there were so many things that we went through that were hard. And but I think it was so important because it forced us to trust in the purpose and to believe in the mission of the organization. And that makes you better over time because it builds your character rather than a bunch of young folks coming into success. That could have been a nightmare. So I just trust that God's plan was best. And of course, looking back, I still believe it was.
Well, of course, we met in C12, the Christian CEO group, and I know you're also a fan of that organization. And so you and I have been walking together for a long time. And I think before we started recording today, we were just talking about all the different things that have happened, the seasons, if you
Mm.
will, of life that you go through in life generally, but especially kind of as a business owner and leader. And you were kind of the poster child for C12. I mean, you were doing ministry things inside. You had a foundation that was helping other business people do volunteer activities, and you're taking people on mission trips. And that's a whole nother podcast we could do just on the way you were doing ministry inside the business and helping other people do the business. But one of the things we were talking about, and I just want you to just share with the audience here how you think about these different seasons. You were using words like contentment and
Mhm.
openness. And, I'm an old planner. I
Mhm.
wish I always want to know what's around the corner, what's going to happen the next year, 10 years, 30 years. It's just not the way it works.
Yeah.
Can you talk about these seasons and sort
Yeah.
of how to cultivate
Mhm.
contentment and openness in seasons and kind of maybe that's a way to also continue the story of how you've dealt with those.
Yeah, sure. And I just think God's the master builder,
Yeah.
and you don't start out by running things. It usually doesn't end well. And so I look back at different seasons professionally in my spiritual journey across the board. I mean, I think about that time of me laboring in the warehouse, driving the forklift, sweeping the
Yes.
floor. We would literally
Yes.
spread floor sweeps and we would sweep with the big brooms. And I remember thinking one day, is this worth it? But like,
Right.
but then I fast forward 25 years, and my son just recently, I remember, told a mentor of his, he's in ministry now. He said, I need, during this season, I need to learn to drive the forklift. What he was
Hmm.
saying was, I've got all this experience. He's done global missions. He's been all over, but I need to work in the front lines of ministry for a season
Yeah,
because that's part of our development. And then
exactly.
I remember, coming inside and being part of, safety and dispatch and customer service and even management and trying to learn what does it look like to hire and even have to let people go? What does it look like to develop my skill set inside the office as well as outside? And how do I continue to grow my knowledge base so that we can still grow and not put a lid on the organization? And of course, tying that in with my spiritual growth along the way, I'm growing spiritually in that same season. And then, of course, taking on leadership and what does that look like to have other people report to you, and how do you release and do those things? But what you and I were talking about specifically, really, that I think is a crucial, uh, really, it's a crucible for any leader, is we have to recognize that there's going to be those seasons in our life. And
Yes.
how can we find contentment in those seasons? I think back to a guy that worked for me that I remember him coming to my into my office, and we just weren't there yet. We were not. My dad and his partner were still in their 60s, ready to take over, ready for more money, ready to. And we had good skills, and we could do things, but it wasn't our time. And I remember saying, "Our time is coming, but it's not yet." And I just reassured him of that. And he did wind up staying with me, and it paid out really well for him, extremely well. But again, that was an understanding of this is where we are. How do we find contentment? And God's word tells us we're to be content in all seasons, right? And then when we do take on that leadership role, I think we're different when we approach it from that angle. But I remember me personally with the business never thinking I would sell. As you said, I really felt like God had kind of anointed us as a C12 uh, catalyst in our
Right.
city. And so how could I
Absolutely.
ever let go of something that literally we're adding people to C12 left and right? God is using our influence in ways that are building the kingdom. I had the joy of sharing our story at I think it was 2019 at the C12 annual conference. I mean, God was just on the move, just doing so much. And I remember literally I would get calls from uh, folks that were interested in buying the business for years. And I would literally say, this is a ministry and not interested. This is a ministry, not interested. But I think we also, God gives us wisdom to recognize when seasons are playing out. And for me, that change happened during COVID. I remember specifically just the way it impacted the freight market as a whole, the way it impacted our office setting. We went to remote work, so it was different how we were ministering to people. And so I had already released a lot of the leadership uh, roles within the organization to very capable people
Yeah.
that, quite frankly, as we should as leaders, we want to release to people that can do it better than us.
Right.
And I was very confident in that. And I thought, this is great. I'll keep working on the doing ministry, which is my calling, overarching calling in life, and and keep building kind of the foundational footprint in our foundation in our city. But I just remember God downloading to me, literally listening to an update on the company from leadership, that it was time to sell.
Mm.
And in a million years, I never set out to sell the company. I never thought I would even release the company. But it was so clear. And honestly, Jeff, for me, people were like, how did you do that? Was that really hard? And in a lot of ways it was, but in a lot of ways it wasn't, because I just knew. And I think God
Yeah.
gives you a peace when that time happens, when you're in a transitional season, especially if you're walking with Him. You just know. Uh, and so for me, I knew, and I really trusted that whatever was going to happen from that moment forward, it was all going to be God. I was going to stay in deep prayer, and it was going to play out however He wanted it to. And I trusted that. And you know the rest of that story, and it did indeed play out.
Now, and I remember you having some trepidation when you knew you had heard from the Lord to do this.
Mhm.
It was clear to you, but you didn't know if God necessarily told that story to your mother. And
Yeah.
your father had passed away, and so you go to your mom, and I know you were nervous about that meeting. Can you tell how that went?
Yeah. Well, of course, I was an only child, you know that. And
Exactly.
so I felt the
Selling the
weight.
family business, this is a big
Yeah.
deal.
Well, and we have such a great reputation, largely because of all those that worked in the business, starting with my dad. And, we became, if you will, the model company here in Houston for what we did. We handled more volume through the Port of Houston than any other transportation provider for many years. And so the footprint was set. And so, yeah, she was really the only one that I was a little bit nervous about talking with about it for obvious reasons. I preached my dad's funeral. So the weight of knowing him so well, and all that he did, and even my mom, I can't leave her out of that, because she literally worked as a nurse when we started to help pay bills. And she was a driving force behind allowing it to happen. But yeah, I drove up to, she had a little place up in East Texas, and sat on the back porch with her. And incredibly, I shared with her what God had put on my heart. And really her words were basically, your dad would be so proud.
Mm, I just love that.
And it made me kind of tear up as I think about it even
Heck
now.
yeah, man. Makes
And
me
then
think
she
about
goes, we always knew that this would come. So here I was stressing about something that years
yes.
ago they had already seen the calling on my life for God's
Yes.
overarching mission. And Gulf Winds was just a part of that mission. It was
Right.
just one season of what God has done in my life. And so we got to really just celebrate, and have a few tears, but at the same time, just excitement, like
Yeah.
expectation of what is God going to do in the next season. And so that was so wonderful to get that confirmation, as you would imagine. And so I think we overthink transitions sometimes, as if God doesn't know what's coming. And in my case, again, he not only knew, but he confirmed it in a way that brought a lot of peace.
Well, it's just beautiful the way God has orchestrated that. And of course, now you still have the foundation that you started
Mhm.
when the business was running. Hope Legacy. Talk a little about that and how you're
Mhm.
spending your time now. What
Yeah.
is this next season? I guess it's been about 3 years or so since the sale.
Yeah.
And we talked earlier about, no one's got all this figured out. So we're not expecting you to have the next 30 years. I think one of the themes of to me the theme of our chat here today is
Yeah.
just having contentment and openness in different seasons. So what is happening now in this new
Yeah.
season for you?
Well, a couple of things. Right before I jump into that, I wanted to say one more thing, Jeff, as it related
Yeah.
to releasing, because I
Yes.
think all
Please.
business owners need to hear this. And that is, when you love people, when you love God, you feel a real responsibility for people.
Yes.
And and I had people that worked with me for years and years and years. And one of the things you have to do in those moments of release is say, God, I trust that your plan is bigger, not only for me, but also for them.
Yes.
And yes, it's great to be able to go through a sale and bless people financially, but it's more than that. When I now look at what God has done, um, in the good, the bad, and the ugly, right through all of this, he repositions his people to do his work. So I can
Yes.
now look around all of Houston. I see people that worked at Gulf Winds here
Right.
and around the country, and it brings me a lot of joy. There's a couple of them that own their own businesses now.
Yes.
Um, Yet I was stressing out, like, what's going to happen if they don't work
As
for
if
me?
you have to, they're not going to be okay if you don't
Yes,
control their employment.
yes.
That's a really a taking the place of God. I think this is a very important point.
Well, and especially when you have shared the gospel with them, some
Right.
of which you've led to Christ personally by the grace of God.
Right.
You've shared the gospel. They've received Christ as their Lord and Savior over many years. You've walked with them in discipleship relationships. Yeah, you feel that pressure, but that is an unfounded pressure
Right.
because again, God's picture, his business is so much bigger than ours, and He knows. And so a lot of times even when it's hard, he will end something to scatter seed. And I have that picture in my head, and I get a lot of joy out of that because as seeds are scattered for good reasons, for challenging reasons, or for ugly reasons, they're still scattered. And one thing I know, when we scatter seed and they're watered, God brings the growth. And so he expands our footprint through these times. If I hold on tight and I just keep it and I just try and manage it and it, I'm not operating from a place of peace and I'm not operating from a place of multiplication, which again spills into your next part of your question there for
Well,
me,
but
which
just to
yeah.
put just to highlight what you just said, part of the way you and I have talked about this before is, this is God's story,
Mhm.
right? This is about God bringing his kingdom here and inviting us to participate. It's actually not about, us individually.
Yes.
Yes, he invites us. Can you talk a little about that? Because
Mhm.
I think it gets to like who's in charge,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, it's his story. I
Right.
always love the saying that, there's a story and he's the main character.
There you go.
It's not us. And
Right.
and that's what I witnessed in Gulf Winds and the fact that we could, live out a season of ministry that was fantastic and
Yeah.
unbelievable is wonderful. Uh, Even invited in some of our competitors to be a part of
Yeah.
that because again, his overarching kingdom is bigger than just our little company, our little
Right.
world. And so to me, I love the word. We changed the name of our foundation from more than the move. It's about more than moving freight to Hope Legacy Collective, right? So we're
Yeah.
better together. That collective impact can only happen when we have open hands and open hearts. Otherwise, we're restricted to just what we have, and that's so important in any industry. We're just better together, but it works against everything in our spirit because everything in us says, "Hold on, hold on, hold on," and God, all the while, is trying to get us to do this: open hands, open hearts. I
Exactly.
try and remind myself of that daily because He can do more with less.
Yeah. Well, and now you're able to, he's just got you in a new season that he has ordained. He made you an evangelist. He's opened up that time that you were spending with the business to do more of who he made you to be. And so, can you talk a little about that? Your focus on evangelism and maybe as a multiplier effect. So, early days, how is this new season opening up for you?
Yeah. So in the new season, obviously having the opportunity to go through a sale, we took a large portion of that, obviously with y'all's help and guidance. Tax savings obviously was huge, but also just stewardship. How can we best steward what now God is transitioning from what was one entity to now an entity that is called Hope Legacy Collective? And so we want to restore hope in the lives of people, right? We want to create a legacy for folks, and we're better together. And so we really see ourselves as a gospel catalyst. And we love evangelism. We love ministries that focus on evangelism, discipleship. We love being a city connector of those things
Yeah.
because we firmly believe that God has placed us in Houston. He's brought the nations to Houston. And so we just believe that God is not only working in Houston, but he is literally exporting the gospel. And I just came out of logistics, so I really get this. So
Ooh.
he's importing people, and then he's saving them, he's equipping them, and that is just that we get to be a part of what he's doing, not only here in Houston but around the world. One of our favorite things to do is work with small to mid-sized ministries because we love to work with them from a strategic perspective. And we can write a check, yes, but we love to get other people involved so that it's bigger than just us. And we love to help them do the things they need to do to take it to the next level. And I feel like we got to experience that in Gulf Winds. And so really he's taken what we experienced in a company, and he's now saying, take those skills, take those resources, and now go help ministries do the same thing. Also, by the way, help encourage other C12 types, people who want to use their business as ministries, as to what does that look like. And so I continue to be called to help, grow C12 and see companies really release control and say, I trust God with whatever you're calling me to. And we just want to be a multiplier ultimately of the greatest joy in the world. That is the hope of Jesus. That's the gospel. And so that's what we do every day. I've got one guy that works for me. His name is Jamie Hampton. He's tremendous, wonderful, like a son to me. God brought him to me. He was in college ministry. Then he worked for me at Gulf Winds for close to 10 years. And he was the perfect person to take over there. And so he's given me an errand, if you will, to come alongside and help connect and share the good news and multiply what we're doing. But it's been a lot of fun. Not to say there haven't been days like early on that I was like, okay, now what?
Correct.
But most people are like, well, how did you do it? For me, you always operate out of your identity. And so I just know that this is ultimately my calling. And so for me, it wasn't like I just started being someone else the next day. And I think we've talked about that. I think all that a sale does ultimately is provides more resources to steward. And you're going to steward those however you were before, but just you get to do more of it. And so
Exactly.
I just want to multiply. There's three things I talk to people about primarily. Take a risk for God. Like, what are you waiting on? Because God is big and he's got big things for you. Trust him through the ups and downs of life, because you're going to have ups and downs. And then thirdly, God is a God of multiplication. And when we're multiplying as believers, whether that's in the workplace, in the church, in ministry, in our homes, we have so much joy because that's how God designed us to operate. And I want to stay in that multiplication arena until I go home to see the Lord. And I just pray that God continues to lead and guide. I know he will.
Well, Todd, it's been a joy to walk alongside you and watch that multiplication happen from sweeping the floors that built the muscle to run the business, to help other businesses use their platform for ministry. And now, frankly, I think you have even a bigger stage that God has given you to love on his people. So,
Which that's what led me to the book ultimately.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
delivering hope. pick one up, and I love it, and I've already been sharing it with people, and check that out. And before we leave, and I know you already gave us 3 quick tips there: take a risk for God, trust Him through the ups and downs, and trust Him to multiply. If there's some business owner behind you on the journey today who's just trying to kind of make this shift,
Mhm.
how can they make this shift toward using their platform a little bit more for God's glory? What's just some small practical tip they could do tomorrow to take a step in the right direction?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, we always operate out of our identity. And
Mm,
so what I like to say is you can't overflow unless you fill up personally.
yes.
And so when you meet people who are overflowing, it's because they fill up personally. And so we desperately need leaders, especially godly leaders, to abide in Christ. And what does that look
Yes.
like? It's prayer, it's getting in the word even when you don't feel like it. It's trusting that God's going to meet you there. Today was a great example. I wouldn't say when I woke up today that I was just like, where am I going to find something amazing today? But I literally have been walking through Proverbs, and I opened to Proverbs 17, which is just happens to be where I'm at today. And it happens to be my granddaughter's 2nd birthday.
Mm,
And I read that grandchildren are a crown. Now, of course, that brings great joy to me. And so I can operate out of that because God's word does that. It fills our heart, it fills our cup. If we're hurting, it's going to meet us there. And so we desperately need leaders that are going to abide and fill up on the right things.
yeah.
Learning, and we want to do all those things. We want to learn, we want to be great at what we do, and understand the landscape. But nothing surpasses like the power of the Holy Spirit working in a man or a woman. When you fill up on that Spirit, He gives us a helper and it overflows. And that overflowing is a supernatural occurrence that impacts everyone that we come into contact with the love, the grace, the provision, and the mercy of God.
Yeah.
That's the message.
I always say, there's going to be a bunch of 100-mile-an-hour fastballs coming at you.
Yeah.
If you don't get in the cage and
Yeah.
have God training you on a good swing,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, the other piece too is, and I would say this, just do something. Like,
right,
don't overcomplicate it. Like, a
right,
lot of times I used to worry about that even in C12. Like, I remember one guy, I think it was Matt Furman or whatever, who was like just in awe when he came to the first meeting, and I was given the presentation because we were doing so many things for
right,
ministry. But my message to anybody is we didn't start doing all those
right.
things. We started with one. And so,
Exactly.
what's one thing that you can do? Can you start a Bible study? Can you take people on a mission trip? Can you pray for somebody? Can you maybe
Exactly.
pick up some Gospel of John tracts and put them at the window or at your entry point? Can you open a Bible? Can you, there's so many
Yeah.
little things that we can do that will have a ripple effect. But you do have to start, and you have to take that chance because, again, it's like Philip Rivers said, you know, you can either take a shot or you sit on the sidelines. And God's called us all to take shots as believers and to believe that He's the master planner, that He's the one who's going to work it out. And so we got to take that shot. We got to take that risk. And for me, early on, it was sharing my faith, and it just kind of expanded from there.
Well, Todd, I can't thank you enough for joining us. I love that. Just take a little time, little quiet time to get your swing ready, and then just do a little something to get started and build that muscle. So,
Amen.
thank you, Todd, for being with us today. It's been a real blessing.
Thank you, Jeff. God bless you.
And thanks everybody for listening to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Subscribe on YouTube, share it with a friend, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.